All right, here we go. We'll have Travis Hines, who covers Iowa State at 3:45 with their showdown coming up. Hell of a game with Oklahoma State. That's very soon. Also, the Big 12 standings. We've kind of talked about it. We know that Oklahoma's kind of now become a little bit more like what we used to see with the explosive offense. I still wonder about the ability and how they tackle. It seems like to me that's just in my head. But Oklahoma and Oklahoma State at top 4-0, 3-0, Oklahoma State. Baylor is 3-1, Iowa State's 2-1. Among these teams, Texas Tech, TCU, Texas, Kansas State, West Virginia, Kansas, and those last three are all 0-3. Everyone else has 2 losses. Can any of them get themselves back up to the top and be a part of this thing before it's all said and done?
Thought we were holding off on the Big 12 talk to get to Tex. But to answer your question, I think K-State, to get to the top, I don't see it for those 0-3 teams. No,
not the 0-3, but if Texas. Here's the problem with UT now. They've lost to Oklahoma State and to Oklahoma, which means both of those teams have to lose 3 times. Mm-hmm. Am I right?
Yeah.
Unless you get into a muddle of a bunch of 7-2s, which that's hard to get to that many of them.
I don't think you can take – I think you can kind of take Texas out of it at this point because with 5 or 6 games left, depending on how many you do have to play, it's going to be really hard to see somebody to lose 3 games while Texas also doesn't lose because – look, they've kind of shown what they are. They're better or they're good. They've got potential, but they don't have a whole lot of depth. They're not really good in the fourth quarter against good teams, and they're still, they do some dumb
football things. They would need Oklahoma and Oklahoma State to lose 3 times, and that's not impossible, but I think that the odds are pretty much against
Oklahoma and Oklahoma State also play each other at the end of the year,
so
that's just one less chance for one of those teams to lose.
Right, exactly right. But again, as you mentioned, that means Texas would have to run the table the rest of the way, and they did that one time, I think. They've lost many times to Oklahoma under Mack Brown, and then they would run the table the rest of the year, and they were finally able to get Oklahoma in 2005. All right, Craig, what else about the Big 12 do you want to discuss?
Nothing top of mind. I just kind of running through the standings themselves. I think you have K-State and West Virginia and Kansas are obviously all out of it.
Does that surprise you that K-State's 0-3 and out of it, basically?
It does, but you look at who they played. They played the best teams in the Big 12 so far.
Yeah.
Outside of Baylor, they played all the best teams, so that's why their record's 0-3. It's not like they're 0-3 and they lost to Kansas and they lost to West Virginia. No, they lost to Iowa State. They lost to Oklahoma. That's who they're losing to, and Oklahoma State. So, it's not surprising, but it's a little bit of a mirage. But, yeah, I think the way you put it with Texas, they're pretty much out of it, barring, an asteroid hitting Earth or something and completely shaking things up. I don't see how they get back in it, needing both Oklahoma schools to lose multiple games. And as you said, Paul, one of them's, one's guaranteed for one of them. But outside of that, they could very well meet undefeated at the end of the year, which I wrote about in my article. That's a certain possibility. I think they'll both be favored in every single game the rest of the way until they play each other. So, yeah, I think it's pretty much Oklahoma schools. I think Iowa State's still in the mix. You can't rule them out in any way. If they get a win over Oklahoma State, then all this is a moot point. And, they will hand Oklahoma State that first loss, and then it really gets interesting in terms of the standings race. But, yeah, Iowa State's still very much in it. I'm glad Baylor played them, for Baylor's sake when they did, and not like in this stretch run or Brocktober, as some people refer to it at times for Brock Purdy and Iowa State. TCU's interesting. I don't really know what to make of them, but at just 1 and 2, you still have to consider them.
But you know what they're like? And they kind of proved that a little bit against Oklahoma. And I know you could say whatever you want about Gary Patterson. We know they're like you have to kill them to beat them. They're not going away. Even with sometimes we can get into Gary Patterson, you're going to have to kill them to beat them. And believe me, there's games that they still will win before it's all said and done.
JD and I talked about this on the big one too, which you'll see on Wednesday night. But the way I see it is that there's tiers. You've got like an upper tier right now, which is Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. And then you get like second tier, which would be Iowa State is right at the top and like maybe in between, with like the sandwich pick in Major League Baseball. Like they're right there. And then Texas and TCU are in that second tier. And then the rest of it is kind of that's the bottom tier. And you can maybe even put Kansas State in the second tier if they start winning against teams that are less than the ones that they've already lost to.
Yeah, they're 0-3 though. I mean, that would be really hard to do anything at 0-3. I mean, they're pretty much done. All they can really do is play spoiler. To me, it's like there's 4 teams that are really in the mix. It's the Oklahoma schools, it's Baylor, and it's Iowa State. And then outside of that, it would take a lot of help for a Texas or a TCU to get back into the mix. That's kind of how I view it. I view those 4 schools are racing right now for the title game, and there are a couple of others that could potentially, if things got really screwy, that could potentially find their way in. The one that's right there in the middle of that I really have no faith in is Tech. I don't have faith. I don't have belief in them, but there they are. They're 5-2. If they win this weekend against K-State, which K-State should win that football game, you would think, but I mean, who the heck knows? If Tech wins that game, you have to give it up. You have to give them their props, whether you really believe in it or not. They'd be 6-2, and they won't be favored in another game past this weekend. But still, they would be in the mix, so to speak, which is surprising. But that's to me what it looks like. Is those 4 teams: Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Baylor, Iowa State, and then a pack of 2 or 3 that if things really got squirrely could potentially upset the apple cart. And then there's, obviously K-State's out. They can only play spoiler.
K-State plays this week at Texas.
West Virginia's out. Yep. Kansas is out. And a couple more might be out.
TCU's on the ropes. They've been hurt.
Yeah, they're on the ropes.
They've had some issues at injury, but you're going to have to kill them.
They'd have to win out, though. They would have to win out, and they would have to also get some help.
Their defense is going to have to get better, too.
And I know that they have had, lots of discussion about certain players coming back, especially on defense and helping out, but it better happen soon because, there's not a whole lot of time left at this point. There's only a few more weeks remaining now. We're past the halfway point, so if those reinforcements are going to come, they need to get back in a hurry. But yeah, that's kind of the way I view it right now. Is the Oklahoma schools, Iowa State and Baylor, and obviously Oklahoma State's got the win over Baylor, and Baylor's got the win over Iowa State. Iowa State can get a win over Oklahoma State this weekend, and so on and so forth. So it should be fun because a lot of these teams still have to play at least a couple of others down this home stretch.
Oklahoma, Kansas, we know what happens there. There was a text, I get those mixed up. I shouldn't. Asking about anything that Leipold brings to the table. Let him have time. Kansas, you have nothing else to lose. Give him a chance. Let it take time like a fine wine. Or marinating something for dinner and then cooking it on the grill. Let it marinate.
So you got to pay a football coach $3 or $4 million a year on the low end in the Power 5, right? So if you're going to pay $3 or $4 million a year, why not pay $3 or $4 million a year and leave the guy alone as opposed to paying what it ultimately going to wind up being $12 million a year because you're firing coaches and their whole staffs every 3 years. So just pay the $4 million a year.
They're paying Mangino still, aren't they? Maybe not. It's
they're paying Charlie Weiss still.
So they've had Weiss, they've had Miles, they've had Beatty, they've had Turner Gill.
Yeah.
It's just it's a mess.
So pay your $3 or $4 million a year. Let him grow into the program to where he can grow it, and quit putting ridiculous expectations on it. Let Bill Self run the school that he does anyway, and see what happens at the end of it.
Yeah, no one's putting expectations, though, are they? You're almost inferring someone was, but nobody's that dumb.
I think they did beforehand. I think that was the problem.
I think he wanted to know if there's any hope.
Yeah,
is there hope to compete for a Big 12 title? No.
No. But there's no hope for that, and there's no hope for that anytime soon. Just being brutally honest with you, that's just the truth. They're nowhere close, and if there was even a semblance of being close, then maybe it could have happened against Tech last weekend, and they got their doors blown off by an average Red Raiders squad. And I'm not trying to pick on Tech, I promise. But, I do think there is hope, but it's way down the line, and it's a matter of being patient. And I know that's the hardest thing for fans, but, given KU's situation and what he walked into, you have no other choice, really. If you want anybody to come in and resurrect that program, it's going to take time. It doesn't matter if you brought Saban in. Maybe he could land 20 transfers and you'd be a lot better immediately. But, ultimately, the only way you grow into a solid program again is to give the man time. And I do think he can do it. I do think that – I'm not saying that I think he's going to compete for Big 12 titles anytime soon. But in terms of, getting them back in a positive direction, I do think he can accomplish that if they are patient.
All right. When we come back – let's go to one call.
Yeah.
And I just received the text as well about a quote from Gary Patterson about a writer who wrote about Patterson, It's time to move on. He does read and know everything.
Well,
we'll have that in a second.
And that is one thing, too, that is interesting is the Big 12 coaching carousel and what that could potentially look like, which is kind of part of the storylines. Matt Wells, I mean, if he wins game number 6 this weekend and they end up screwing around and win 7 or 8 games, I mean, do you still fire the guy? I don't think that you really could if he's winning 7 or 8 games, but that's obviously a situation to monitor. I think Neil Brown's fine at West Virginia for the time being, but, I mean, obviously there are at least some grumblings now starting to grow a little louder. And then, I wonder, too, the big crapshoot will be the offseason. Does Lincoln Riley eventually want to move on to the NFL? Does that finally become the time? Or, does Gundy finally get that call that makes him want to leave Oklahoma State? So it's weird. The Big 12 right now could stay pat with all 10 coaches remaining where they are, or like half the league could disappear. So, that's for us to find out in the next few months.
Yeah, and maybe even sooner than that. Paul?
Right.